some of my literary associations and acquaintances in Cambridge, Massachusetts, put me in touch with members of PEN International, which I learned later through a book called Paying the Piper, were fronts for their company. And this is Anne Bernayse, who was the daughter of Edward Bernayse, who started the whole public relations industry in America, and allegedly was doing public relations for the Nazis. This is the family of Sigmund Freud's wife. I don't know when they came to America. Edward Bernayse, when I called to ask him about the party we were giving at a beauty parlor celebrating our magazine, CANTO Review of the Arts, never answered the phone, but only said, "He's not here," referring to himself. I'll see if he's come back. On this occasion, I told him who we had as honored guests, Anne Beattie and Norman della Gioia, who was a composer and a professor of music at Boston University. And J.D. O'Hara, whom we published in CANTO, a wonderful review of Nabokov and a short story of his. He was a professor of English at the University of Connecticut, and always called me Ed for editor, and published several of his pieces at CANTO. He's a very handsome, strong, very strong Harvard graduate, I think Harvard PhD, and I never took a course with him at UConn, but I think I did take a course on frivolous novels, including Ronald Furbank, and I guess some of the Nabokov novels we studied, like a novel he wrote about a long poem, might consider frivolous. I mean, they were surely amusing. There's some things about even Lolita that might be considered frivolous. And what I found out about PEN International was, from this book, Pay the Piper, was that it was a front for the company. Of course, my friend John Douglas's father was Secretary of the Air Force, and when John came back with the film he had made with Robert Kramer in North Vietnam called The People's War, in which there's a scene of some men with a crosscut saw cutting through a very long, thick plank of wood. That became a metaphor for the long haul that the war that North Vietnam was carrying on against America was for them, supporting supply routes to the Viet Cong, and doing things like picking up people like John McCain after he parachuted from a plane which has been bombing North Vietnam, and then torturing people like him, and hiding the POWs. So it was a very long war for them. Anyway, John arrived in the United States. Immediately the CIA seized his film reel. He made a call to his father. Father called the agents that were responsible for having seized this film that John had made with his friend and collaborator Robert Kramer, who later became rather famous in France for making a movie called Route 1 and then Walk the Walk. And then in a few days died thinking he had the flu of meningitis, where he lived on the road between Le Havre and Rouen. And his wife, Jane Kramer, the same name that a journalist friend of ours has, who's the wife of Vincent Crapanzano, and writes often for the New Yorker. Was a friend of a number of pals of mine in Paris, namely Camille Aubode, who has a poetry club in the Senate, which is in the chateau of Catherine de Medici in the Luxembourg Gardens. Then you have to go through extensive security and checks and searches to enter that building, the Senate building in the basement of the chateau. And I had paid about €85 to join this poetry club, but nothing has happened with it. I don't know, it's just been sort of dormant. At any rate, Anne Bernayse was a good friend of Roby Macaulay's, who used to be editor of Kenyon Review. My friend David Madden was his assistant editor years ago. David, whom I call Jerry Madden, published a very successful novel called London Bridge, which the University of Tennessee Press published, as they do all his books, all his essays, poems, etc., etc. He published about 50 books. To go on with the Roby Macaulay story, who became later, after being editor of Kenyon Review, which is another front for the company. He then became fiction editor at Playboy, after which he got the job at Houghton Mifflin of editor-in-chief. Now his wife, Pam Pater, worked for us as sort of an intern at CANTO. She was not on the editorial board, but she was just an assistant, a reader, came to a couple of meetings, and we gave her a whole bunch of boxes of manuscripts, which she put under her bed and never read, and a whole bunch of copies of CANTO, which she never distributed. They just got pushed off to the side in their place. They lived on Beacon Street. They're paying something like $14,000 a year in property taxes. It's really something that one just should never let happen to one, renting, either owning or renting an apartment in Boston. The property taxes are exorbitant. To continue with my story, we were strongly urged to join Penn because it was a front, as was in CANTO magazine, which both later Sir Frank Kermode and later Sir Stephen Spender resigned from when they were editors, when they found out that Harold Lasky was getting money from the company, probably the Fairfield Foundation. It was a big crisis in their lives and sort of wrecked Frank Kermode's marriage. He was so upset. He got involved with my first wife, whom we later married, after she ran off to meet him in England, after begging me to let her go back to Paris where she'd been on her year abroad. And after paying for that trip, the next thing I knew, she made a rendezvous with Professor Kermode, her Shakespeare professor, who had told my wife, Patricia Goodhart, Pat Goodhart, later published as Pat Goodhart, her pen name, that Anita was the best student he ever had, which she relayed to Anita, which may have gotten her to start corresponding with Sir Frank. Sir Stephen was a good friend of mine when he was teaching at UConn, and I was getting my master's degree there. At any rate, we did not join Penn. It seemed like a waste of time. They didn't seem to be doing anything very significant, such as protesting anything or gaining lists of signatures of well-known writers. So we just let it go. And I gave Anne Bernayse a review to do. I think she did it of James Atlas's book on biography of Delmore Schwartz, which had done quite well. And certain people like Ann Beattie, I think, also did a review for us at CANTO. She would only review people that she could review favorably, because she was a rogue careerist as a writer, and later she taught at University of Virginia. And my former writing teacher, Monroe Angell, had brought her to Harvard, I think for the Briggs Copeland Fellowship in Creative Writing. She later went to the University of Virginia and had a very nice career. She used to publish all the time in the New Yorker. She let us have about 3 stories for CANTO, and we weren't paying very much. We weren't able to pay very much. But even Joyce Carol Oates published a couple of stories, and she had been publishing regularly in places like the New Yorker. Probably the most prolific woman writer America's ever had. And later, had a very cushy professorship in writing, teaching creative writing at Princeton. And I'll talk a little bit more about my friend John Douglas, who had probably the biggest influence on me as a friend and fellow student at Harvard. We were freshman roommates before he dropped out. Got an apartment on Marlborough Street and started painting full time, and then doing metal sculpture in a garage in Cambridge. He remains a good friend, living in Charlotte on Lake Champlain, not far from Burlington, Vermont. And lives with a wonderful woman, the granddaughter of of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Scotty, her mother. Her father was a lawyer. I'm talking about Bobby Lanigan. And John was the student of Pat Morgan. I knew Pat Morgan's ex-wife, Maud Morgan, who was quite an important figure as an artist in Cambridge. And now there's a whole Maud Morgan Center which does exhibitions. She's deceased. John dated Vicky, their daughter, and other important students, one of whom I was unable to recall his name, was Frank Stella, who gave the Eliot Norton lectures at Harvard, mostly on Kandinsky, very brilliantly. And then, of course, there's Carl Andre. John came. We went up with Frank Janney and Mike McKenzie, who was a great jazz musician. And Frank Janney was later was the proprietor of Ediciones del Norte and published a lot of books written by writers such as Gert Sola and some Mexican novelists. One I think was called Pedro Paremo, and these were mostly novelists in exile because they were very radical, and they lived away from their countries in New York or someplace else in America where they might have been teaching. And Frank's whole list was based on that. And he had all his books he printed out in his barn. And Chelsea, Vermont. He lived there with his wife, Laurie, who he met on fox hunts. It was a wonderful opera singer. They had an opera company, a little small one. We went to their wedding. And Frank Janney's family had made their money making clay flasks for whiskey. And they had given about $5.5 million to start Johns Hopkins years ago. And then they made even more money by buying land near Detroit, on which some of the major car companies were there, leased land for them, for their factories. It was a great business. And his father was also vice president of sales at Procter and Gamble. And they had a big plantation down in South Carolina. John has an extensive autobiographical site, and he has had big shows in Nice with his nude photographs, self-portraits, holding Kalashnikov automatic weapons. And he has a big boat, lives right on Lake Champlain. And we've had many wonderful still photographs of sunsets there and the weather on the lake. And apparently now the nephews or grandchildren of Penelope and Charles Jenks, who's one of the great architectural historians in America. And Penelope is a great sculptor. A close friend married to Sidney Horwitz, wonderful graphic artist, printmaker. They're either grandchildren or nephews are building sailboats to actually freight boats, large sailboats, to bring all the fruits and vegetables they grow around Lake Champlain, down the lake, which connects up with the Hudson River and then eventually to New York City, down the Hudson. Wonderful, wonderful projects. And you know, nothing polluting the atmosphere with gas-driven engines. And there was a wonderful documentary about Pete Seeger and how they got sailboats, and the whole thing was save the Hudson, keep it clean and unpolluted. Anyway, this family of these young people who have wonderful vegetable gardens and are growing lots of trees up in northern Vermont, near Burlington, the capital, are getting all their fruits and vegetables down to New York, down the Hudson, via the Lake Champlain and various ways of connecting maybe some of the old canals that connect with it, and in ways that are non-polluting, which is the way we should all be doing things. Anyway, John Douglas's friendship and influence. I mean, he taught me how to cut films with a heat on a heat cutting board, and I did one of my films called Tennessee Newsreels, which is done on a very old Kodak camera, you know, that only could use a very small amount, about 200 to 400 feet of film, and it was done in the color. It was right before my wife left and moved away. Anita, her maiden name was Anita Bullard, and Anita then became Anita Kermode, or Lady Kermode, after he was knighted by the Queen of England. Her husband, Frank, Sir Frank, now deceased. Anyway, John taught me how to cut films on a heat, with heat, and splice it back together. And it's a huge influence. I mean, when our rooms in Mauer House in the Harvard Quad, he brought in huge canvases, which he painted, on which he painted non-objective paintings, one of which he gave me. I had in my living room for years. I gave it back to Bobby, and she took it up to him, so he's got it back. And he's also got some other of my own pieces. And our rooms in Mauer Hall were just chock full of his paintings. I mean, the floor was, he was making a lot of stuff with, making a lot of forms with materials that you just saw on the floor, and the floor was about knee deep with just stuff you can't sew off. And but it was very exciting seeing these fabulous paintings emerge from his work, long hours of work. He was a hard worker and a great filmmaker. He did a film on the Black Panthers. He did one on Cuba. Not only the film on North Vietnam. He started out doing a film about plantation workers in Greenfield, Mississippi, who had walked off the plantation and were living in a tent city. He got a call after he busted up his leg in a truck driving from Orleans to northern France for the army. One night, coming back, he was sort of what I call a psychological idea of it. He was very tired, went to sleep at the wheel, racked up the truck, and completely busted up his leg. Took months to heal. But when he got back to Martha's Vineyard, where his parents had some land, and his brother had the Shenandoah, Bob Douglas, And of course, Black Dog Restaurant, favorite of the Clintons when they were summering there once. John started making pots in a little studio near Vineyard Haven. And it was there that he got the call from somebody to say, you should go make a film about this tent city in Mississippi, which he did. It took him about 5 months. A good film. That's how he got started making films. And it was very productive. He had a commune at Red Dog, his farm near Putney, Vermont, and then a big commune at his loft in Chinatown on Broadway, East Broadway, in view of the Brooklyn Bridge. Anyway, John has always had a tremendous, I think, positive influence on me and been my friend. And it's, I mean, it's a kind of an act of grace by which one is given friends who are doing such interesting things that it might even change one's own life. And the association with them is always supportive and sometimes competitive. We had a reunion of all of our freshman roommates at my son's house in Cambridge. And actually, one of the people, Evan Given, who had been with Edmund Wilson, who they called Bunny, doing charades before the family of the Jenks family. Carlton Jenks was a composer, the father of Charles and Penelope, and he was doing contemporary music. And in fact, when we went to a party at Penelope and Sid Hurwitz's house in Newton, I saw that she'd done a huge amount of work on collecting everything her father had done. So she had an archive on her father's music. And anyway, the Jenks husband and wife would be having drinks while Edmund Wilson and Eben Given, who was a painter and now does a lot of wood carving, like De La Robbia, but I mean really very original, wonderful stuff. He's the father of my son's wife, Saskia, and which is part of a very large commune, which is located on Fort Hill in Boston, not far from some of the major hospitals like Brigham and Women's, and of course the wonderful animal hospital, which is where we brought our darling Pyewacket before he died, was suffering from kidney failure. Angel Memorial, it's called. Well, Fort Hill is quite near that, and in Larkspur. Anyway, all these friendships and associations are part of being an artist and finding one's way, how to find galleries, maybe even people, collectors of one's own work. It's a wayward business. How to get any kind of revenues coming in or income as an artist. At the moment, we're renting our house to the 26th Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, and that is a source of income. And we're here in Normandy, where we own our place, in which this video is being recorded, and so we don't have to pay any mortgage payments here or rent. and we go to Paris sometimes, staying at a friend's house, and we live at Rennes, as we did for Christmas. And we even talked about buying a hotel in Paris. And we're starting a new magazine called of style and fashion called Montparnasse. Edited from here, published in Paris as a tabloid, in which we will publish chapters from my novel Auto Portrait, an essay of mine called The Poetics of Suicide, about the use of suicide in narrative and dramatic literature since the Greeks, and then a long essay I did about a wonderful artist from Montenegro named Dado, who has some work in the Pompidou Museum, the Beaubourg, and it's the last part of which is called The Aesthetics of Destruction. It's about artists who get into a frenzy of destroying their own work. And one example is Giacometti, and another is Dado. Dado even asked to improve a painting that had already been sold, and in doing so, he actually destroyed the painting. His gallery owner now won't let him have it. He put it in a warehouse and won't let him get near anything. And he had shows, Dado had shows in New York, and maybe the reason he didn't become famous from those shows is that those dealers were onto this tendency of his to either ruin his work or destroy it, very deliberately. It's a beautiful day here. The sun is not warm yet. The air is very frigid. Still winter. Hasn't gotten really cold. I think it did freeze up, and one of our friends' cars couldn't start because of it. But winter has been slow coming, and it may end early this year. I hope by March, the end of March. It usually gets very nice in the mid-February, at which moment we would always come from America, and we'd be able to eat outside on our terrace in Combemer, before we sold the place, which we called Le Fresnay, which means the ashes, the ash trees, and to a man named Matteo Favara, who's done wonders with the place and spent a lot of money on it. I won't go into that. That's a long story. So I'm at the point of concluding what I'll be saying today on various subjects. Something like 33 videos have been done about mainly my father's biography and so my relationship to my father, about which I'm doing actually a film scenario. And I've done some of that here. I don't know if it's been actually all made available by Google, because Google sometimes, if you mention the wrong thing, they get very funny, and then you lose whatever it was. It's just a waste of time. But I hope that this has been preserved, and thank you for your patience. I remain David Landers Van Vactor, son of a composer. I am myself a novelist and a painter, and around this room you can see some of my paintings. My collages there, inspired by Georges Braque, in an exhibit I saw at the Grand Palais. And when collages are called in France glued paper, I do these large brush drawings, and I've used them and to glue onto pieces of heavy paper that I've done, put applied color to get these contrasts between some color painting, contrasting with the large brush paintings I do with a Chinese brush I brought on Rue de Perche, right next to the gallery. Alain Margerin, who is the dealer for Dado and other artists, wonderful artists. But this Chinese brush was really responsible for a lot of works, of which I have several in our stairway going upstairs, and along with other drawings with pen and inks that I do. And of course, after 19 strokes, it's a little harder to draw and even see what I draw because I lost a lot of vision. But I go on, still painting. Thank you for giving me your attention so long. I hope I haven't been boring, and I hope I've enunciated my words sufficiently for you to have been able to understand me, or are able now if you're looking at this and listening to it. It's a long life, and one never knows how much more of it you have left. So we go on, get up in the morning full of hopes and ideas and waiting for the dawn, and good conversation, visits from friends, and not much traveling at this moment, but though we did go to Paris for Christmas, had a wonderful time with friends. I brought them paintings. After seeing the Turner, the movie Mr. Turner, the lesson I learned is when he was offered £200 for paintings and all of his drawings and notebooks, he said, "It's not possible, I bequeath it to England." I was so touched by that I thought it's time I just start giving away things that nobody wants to buy. Why don't I give them to the people I love? Best friend, which I did, and made some friends really happy at Christmas. It's nice to have something to give people really love. We're given so much in our lives by the Lord. Nice to give it back occasionally. So to all I say, adieu. Happy, happy. Let our year be full of creativity, joy, good food, laughter, plenty of that. That's the best medicine of all. And friendship, or as they say in the Greek, agape, amitié in French. The best thing in the world. I mean, besides the love of a beautiful woman. And I'm lucky to have the most beautiful woman for my wife that I've ever seen. Patricia Goodhart, publishing her with her pen name as Pat Goodhart. She'll be out with her novel, The Translator, a reissue of it soon in paper. Cheers, all. And to our health, most important thing in the world. Amen. A nice fire in the fireplace still burns. Sun is still out. and it's probably getting on toward lunchtime, but I've had my lunch already. I ate very early today, about 11:30, and await my son and wife to return from Saint-Pierre-sur-Dive, where they went to get some medicine for my gout as a preventative, which will be quite crippling if it hits with its glass shards of uric acid crystals, which can actually sever a tendon if you let it go on too long. It's a hell of it's a form of arthrosis, gout. Colchicine is a medication that Paracelsus, the great Paracelsus bombastus in the 15th century, was able to come up with, and it's the cheapest medication that you can buy in a pharmacy in France. About $4. Be good to yourself. Be well. And we wait for the blessed love of little children and our beautiful wives. Hail, ecce homo, as Nietzsche said in his book. Behold man. And look what we've done to Mother Earth. Anima mundi, in which I believe is actually alive and knows how we have hurt her with our pollution, our plastic bags, choking them out in the mouths of fish, wrecking their coral reefs, polluting nature with insecticides, destroying the bees, letting runoff from farms destroy our pure water and our streams and springs. It goes on and on. We've got to do it better. Man has to do better. In fact, I've written a lengthy piece about a council in heaven that decides they are not going to allow NASA to be funded so it can stop the comet from colliding. But just let it collide with Earth and destroy man and womankind. Sad last judgment decision, but well deserved, I'm afraid. Especially with our unending wars, fighting our brothers, the Islamic State, who are really the children of descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's progeny with Hagar, after Sarah was barren, was barren and not fertile, he had to take the servant woman to have children with. And they were the ones who pulled Joseph after he'd been thrown in a pit by his brothers because they were jealous of his coat of many colors. Those are the ones who pulled him out of the pit. The traveling Ishmaelites who now have wandered the earth and now turn up as Sunni and Sufi and the Islamic states, countries like Saudi Arabia, Syria, and other places. The Sudan, even in Kenya, the Al-Shabaab, Algeria, Mali, many African countries like Nigeria, where there are many, many Muslims as well as Christians. Enough said. I don't want to start getting dogmatic. It's a bore. It's the sort of thing my grandmother wouldn't allow at dinners. Nothing about religion or politics. My dear grandmother, Mabel Virginia, which means the Virgin, Redmond Landreth. My middle name is Landreth. It's a Belgian name, from Flanders. Later they were in Scotland, cattle rustling from the Highlands. Having arrived at Borwick on the Tweed River probably in about the year of 1008, after Guillaume the Conqueror had come from France, from his away from Falaise, which means cliff, where he was born, and I think their ship sailed from Honfleur, which is our favorite place, near Trouville and Deauville, where I and my son David and John Michael Mackenzie was our host at several nice long lunches. They were at a place that I had painted called the Thatch House. In French, it's called the La Chaumière, and near between Honfleur and Trouville. So we were just in Honfleur, enjoying that place, where the boats go out into the estuary to fish. We'll bring back lobster and all sorts of fish, from turbot, sole, sea bass, which they call bar in France, and so that reference to my Landers family and its relationship to William the Conqueror involves an Honfleur. I think it's even mentioned in a Shakespeare play, because that's where the ships, before the Battle of Hastings, when the French became a part of England and influenced our English language with their words and Latin words, multisyllabic words, abstract words which you can just pronounce with a French accent and be able to use abstract words which come from Latin. It's a way to speak French. One way. And I love speaking it. For example, a line from Mallarmé, Le Vierge, le vivace et la belle aujourd'hui. This is the beginning of a stanza that ends up with one word, le cygne, the swan. I think it's a pun. In English it would be the sign, but it's actually the swan in French. The swan which flies around the world, that big white bird. As well, I mean, geese go all the way from Normandy to Japan. My friend Maurice Izumi was very interested, and actually you included them in a drawing he did of our house in Le Fresnay in Courmayeur, which we sold to Matteo Fabra, who lives now there with his dear Lucy Mellors, and I've done enough for today. Hope I have not taxed your patience. Maybe that's my wife and son coming back. I will just now exit the room, and I hope this survives and that you enjoyed it. Hi!
You finished?
Mm-hmm.